Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's video, and a video that's been quite requested on the channel for an off-season preview. Of course, we've done a ton of off-season previews already, and we're kind of continuing this now. Draft lottery threw a little wrinkle in here, but we're going to get to more off-season previews, especially now that we know the exact NBA draft order. I think it kind of clarifies some things for us as well, which really excites me moving forward in this process. We might even revisit a couple of teams that we've already done an off-season preview for, just since we now know where they are drafting in the lottery. And let's jump into it here with this Los Angeles Clippers offseason preview. Really excited. If you guys are enjoying the content here, make sure to leave a like on today's video. Subscribe to the channel for more. Both of those things let me know I'm doing a good job here and that you guys appreciate the work I'm putting into these videos. A lot of time and effort goes into these. And I make a lot of sacrifices so that I can make sure to continue recording and posting content for you guys, because I love talking about basketball, and I know you guys love talking about basketball as well, which gets me into my next point here. I know you guys are big-time basketball fans, so we have a Discord now for the channel, and it's just for basketball fans in general. We don't even have to talk about utility sports content. We just want to talk about the NBA, talk about college prospects, those kinds of things. The Discord link is in the description. Please go join over there. We have a bunch of different channels and sub-channels where you have the opportunity to talk about your favorite team with other people who have the same fandom as you. You can also talk about NBA draft prospects. You can talk about potential trades. There's a lot of fun stuff going on over there, so I really recommend joining that. And you get to talk with everyone that watches the channel here, basically, and it's a really fun community that we're building, so I really recommend checking that out. Again, the link is in the description for that. So jumping back into the Clippers here now with a video preview, I think when you look at this team, there's a few things that really stand out to me that should be considered key points of emphasis to kind of talk about in this video. First thing is a season recap. We need to look at what went right, what went wrong for this team this past season. And I think it's kind of an age-old story now at this point for the Clippers, some of the things that have gone wrong since signing Kawhi Leonard and trading for Paul George. And then it also becomes decision time in LA. I know a lot of people are going to talk about the potential of, oh, do they trade Paul George? Sorry, the Portland Trailblazers rumors are just clearly stuck in my head. Do they trade Paul George? Do they trade Kawhi Leonard? I think there would be a lot of discussion about that on Twitter and across a lot of fans. My opinion on that, I'll give you that in this video. 2023 NBA draft targets. We'll also talk about where they're drafting in this year's draft, and we'll look at their free agency situation. Little disclaimer, the Clippers really don't have any money to go out and add a guy outside of the mid-level exception if they were to do so, but it's going to be a challenge for them for sure because of some of the new CBA rules and long-term outlooks. It's going to be tough for them to keep some of their players, and we'll kind of discuss what that really looks like. And then we'll finalize the video with an early outlook. What does this team really look like going into next season? What do I expect from them? And to be honest, there's a lot of things that could really get in the way for this team. And there's a lot of things that could also enhance this team's ability to win. So I think they're a really intriguing team going into next year. So let's start where we left off, and that's with this past season and a season recap that, of course, featured Russell Westbrook joining the team. I don't think before the year a lot of people saw that coming, but at the trade deadline when he got dealt to Utah, I did talk about how the Clippers were the best landing spot for him. They ended up finishing the season 42-40. I think a lot of people cling on to the fact that they went 0-5 in their first 5 games with Russell Westbrook. I think that's really something that shouldn't be looked at too heavily. The Clippers multiple times this year went on 3, 4, 5 game win streaks and then would follow it up with a 3 or 4 game losing streak anyway. And then you factor in that, hey, we're adding a brand new point guard into the mix who has the ball in his hands quite a bit, and you're trying to work out some of those chemistry things playing with guys for the first time. It's a challenge, okay? And the Clippers are already a team that was pretty streaky in terms of winning and losing, so I don't think that Russ deserves any of the blame really there for that, especially when you look at some of those losses. It was like, you know, a multiple overtime game against the Kings that ended up with the scores in the 170s. Like, they could have easily won that game if they just closed some things out. And I know people love to blast Russ on Twitter and ESPN specifically about, oh, he lost his man in the matchup when it was a hammer screen to the backside. It was a zone, okay? He didn't actually screw it up. I believe it was Norm Powell in the corner that should have been covering that. So, you know, people love to blast Russ. I don't think he was really the problem. But this team just was kind of a middling team at 42-40, pretty much 500, right? And you look at their offensive and defensive ratings, they're both kind of middling in that regard as well. This team just wasn't great, but they weren't ever bad either. And because of that, they had a decent season, but not a great season. That's really the expectation. Plus, they lost to the Suns in the first round. And that's where some people have questions about the long-term outlook of this team. Do they continue to play with Kawhi Leonard, Paul George? And I think it is a fair question. Both of them averaged under 24 points per game this year, which is, I think, a little bit alarming, especially since individual scoring was so up this year because of the heliocentric approach by NBA teams now. Also, the introduction of the transition take foul, I think, opened up the game a little bit more. They stopped transition significantly less, which led to just flat out more baskets, especially for the most athletic players, which typically the superstars of the league are the most athletic guys for the most part. And Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, I mean, they're both great players still. And this is the one thing, I don't even know if anyone knows this. Kawhi Leonard's one of my favorite players in the league. Now, I don't typically talk about Kawhi Leonard that much. And to be honest, I try and keep it pretty relative to what team I'm talking about. I want to cover every single team, and I'm not going to be biased about it. But Kawhi Leonard, when he is actually healthy and when he's on the court, he is arguably the best player in the world. And I know people are going to roll their eyes at that. Look at what he did to Kevin Durant in game 1 of the series against the Phoenix Suns. When he was healthy, and when he is healthy, I really do believe that there's a good argument to be had that he might just flat out be the best player on the world right now. Like, you know, Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, there's a ton of talent, okay? I don't want to make it seem like, oh, well, Kawhi Leonard's 10 shoulders above everybody. That's not what I'm saying, okay? I'm just saying there's an argument there. He is that good. He is that talented. And in no way, shape, or form, if I was the Clippers, would I look at even considering to trade him, because you're just not going to get the value back. The reasons you're going to trade him would be the reason that team would be apprehensive to trade for him and give you everything, because there'd be questions about, oh, how many games is he going to play? Is he going to be able to play in the playoffs? And there's a really weird narrative going around about Kawhi Leonard, and, you know, people laughing about Anthony Davis, and then people say, oh, well, keep it a buck with Kawhi Leonard. He misses just as much time. That's true, but show me where Anthony Davis tore his meniscus or tore his ACL or tore his quad. Right? You get what I'm saying here? Kawhi Leonard has suffered really serious injuries in his career that have caused him to miss extended periods of time. And because of that, he's very cautious now with his knees and his legs. Anthony Davis gets poked in the eye and you don't know if he's going to come back in the next week. There's a significant difference between those two players, in my opinion. Now, Anthony Davis is a fantastic player as well, of course, but I don't really understand the narrative around Kawhi Leonard as much. I know load management is really based upon his actions, but we know that it works, especially with his body. Look at what happened in 2019 with the Toronto Raptors. They were very cautious with him. They won a title with him, and he was significantly the best player in the world that season, especially in the postseason. He was just so much better than everybody else, which is why they ended up winning. And I think the Clippers do need to follow that approach, which is what they've been doing, but they've just had really not timely injuries. It's been really bad luck, because Kawhi Leonard, think about it, tears his ACL in the second round against the Jazz. They go up into the Western Conference Finals against Phoenix. They lose in 6 games. If they have Kawhi Leonard, they definitely win that series. They almost win that series without Kawhi Leonard if you take out the alley-oop and some of the other things that happened in that series. I think a really poorly officiated Game 6 as well. The Clippers were right there to maybe get into the finals against the Bucks. And if you look back to the year prior, 2 years prior, with Kawhi Leonard versus Milwaukee versus Giannis Antetokounmpo, I think Kawhi Leonard's the best matchup in the world for Giannis. So I think if the Clippers were healthy, if Kawhi Leonard doesn't tear his ACL in transition against Joe Ingles on a little bump in transition, the Clippers probably do win the finals that year. I think Paul George is a fantastic player as well. One player I really do want to highlight is Russell Westbrook. In the 21 games with the Clippers, here are his numbers: 15.8 points per game, 7.5 assists per game, down a little bit on the rebounds at only 5 rebounds a game. But he did shoot 49% from the field, which is really great efficiency for a guard. And then also 35.5% from 3. So maybe a little bit of an outlier when you consider his actual career numbers. But there's this narrative around Russell Westbrook that you can't win with him because of his shooting. He's a better jump shooter than Anthony Davis statistically for his career. So if you're going to say, oh, well, Russell Westbrook's such a bad shooter, you better keep it a buck with the other guys who shoot even worse than him, that are star level players, okay? LeBron James has had his struggles this year as a 3-point shooter. Anthony Davis has had his struggles for his career as a 3-point shooter. But for some reason, all of the blame for the Lakers got heaped onto Russell Westbrook. And I think it's pretty clear that that was just not a good fit, because once he left the Lakers, not only did he start to shine, but the Lakers started to shine as well. It was just a failure by Rob Pelinka when building that team. And because of that, both entities, the Lakers and Russ, looked worse than they actually were, because they just didn't fit together. building a team's like a puzzle. You have to put the pieces together that fit, and Rob Pelinka tried putting two corner pieces together in Russell Westbrook and LeBron James, and it just did not work out at all. I'm not really sure why he even went that direction to begin with. It was a terrible decision. I told everyone that when it happened. And if you go back and you watch some other YouTubers, you're going to hear people say, I think this is good for the Lakers. Secondary play. I never understood how people believe that. I'm telling you right now, you're going to maybe roll your eyes. Go back and look at it. People were saying that. Norm Powell, as well as having 17 points a game, solidified himself as a high-end bench scorer. He started 8 games this year. I believe played in 60 games. As long as he's healthy and on the floor, they've got a good scorer off the bench that they can go to. Everyone knows that. Zubac, I think, had some real monster games this year. And to be honest, his consistency and stability at the center spot's been really, really nice for them. And in addition to that, Terrence Mann, who played a little bit of point guard this year for them, I think is just flat out a very good player at this point. You look at his traditional counting stats like points per game, rebounds per game, assists per game, you're going to not be blown away by him. But when you actually sit down and watch him play, he's a very impressive player who brings a lot of defensive intensity, can push the pace for you in transition, can help you get set up into the offense, which I think was a big learning curve for him this year, and something that I think he handled very, very well, to the point where if he is the starting point guard next year for the Los Angeles Clippers, I don't feel like it's a big loss for them. I think he's a quality starting point guard, honestly, at this point of his career. So Terrence Mann, he's been on a phenomenal long-term pathway of development, and I think that he's really at a spot now where I 100% trust him to be a starter in this league. And then we want to get into some of the depth. Mason Plumlee, Bones Highland, Nicholas Batum. There's a few things I want to say about these players. First of all, Mason Plumlee was fantastic for the Clippers after acquiring him. They do have bird rights on him. We'll talk about the free agency portion a little bit later on. But I just really do think that their commitment to going to having a second big and not really playing their 5-out offense was interesting, especially since they signed Russell Westbrook post-trade deadline. I thought that we'd maybe see that 5-out offense a little bit more, with kind of Russ being that orchestrator, the guy who's going downhill, getting paint touches and kicking out of that. Would have been interesting to me for sure. But I do want to mention that Plumlee plus Russ was actually a pretty good combination in the regular season specifically. And with the way that they pushed the Suns in the playoffs, I do think that this team has winning makeup. I think that Russell Westbrook was a fantastic addition to the team. I think without him, that series would have been really ugly after Kawhi Leonard got injured and missed a significant amount of time. And you also look at Paul George being out of the series. The Clippers would have gotten waxed without Russ, and instead they lost in 5 games, which it looks like they got waxed, but really they were a lot of good competitive games, and the Clippers were right there in a lot of them. And it's just, you're asking a lot from Russell Westbrook to beat Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, pretty much by himself with the cast of role players. And I do like the depth here on this team a lot, but that's just not going to win if Russ is your best player and you only have depth around him. Like, if you have Kawhi, Paul George, and Russ, you're really a formidable team, in my opinion. And I think that Russ really did fit well into the makeup of this roster. Bones Highland, it was surprising to me how much he did actually play in the postseason, sometimes playing even more than Eric Gordon. The Eric Gordon thing was interesting, too. Obviously, he's one of the better deep-range shot makers in the league, and he's also someone who very aggressively drives to the rim, sometimes out of control even. But for Bones, I thought it was interesting that Ty Lue stuck with him. First of all, I think Bones Highland did a pretty good job defensively, which is a big concern for me when they got him from Denver. And part of the reason why I didn't expect him to really play a ton of playoff minutes. But Ty Lue actually stuck with him, which was pretty interesting, and had some really nice moments as well in the 5 games in the postseason this year. And then Nick Batum, to quote a TikTok, why the heck Batum in? Like, he's, man, I love Nick Batum. He's such a good connecting player. But if his shot's not falling, specifically in the fourth quarter, when he struggles, especially this past season was a real struggle point for him, I think that, there's just a lot of possessions where he catches the ball and he's open and he should knock down the shot and he just doesn't in the fourth quarter, which was a big concern actually for me, because 2 years ago he would have been knocking all of those down pretty regularly. So I think the Clippers maybe look at him as a guy that they could move off of in the right deal this summer. But we're not really at that spot right now where I can safely project who the Clippers would actually trade him for. And then Marcus Morris, just significantly worse this season than he has been the last couple of years. I think the last 2 years he's been trending downward, and this year was a big drop-off year for him. I think he's lost a lot of his lateral mobility, his quickness. If he wants to extend his NBA career, I think he's going to have to actually get out of the weight room a little bit and do more cardio work and actually shred down a little bit just so he can maintain some of his quickness and change the direction, because this year it was kind of rough. And it was surprising to me because Ty Lue stuck with him for a pretty good amount of the year, which I think most Clippers fans were kind of getting annoyed with. But then luckily Ty Lue kind of shied away from that just a little bit in the playoffs. But of course there was the moment where Batum said, hey, start Marcus Morris over me, this, that. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that was a really winning move either, but it's what Ty Lue decided, and that's where I want to talk about next. Ty Lue, fantastic coach. I think one of the better coaches in the NBA. I think the one thing about him, though, is I'm not sure what his future looks like with the Clippers, because I do think that there is some in-house controversy about Kawhi Leonard and Paul George missing so much time, because at the end of the day, this affects Ty Lue's winning percentage. It affects Ty Lue's playoff record, and it doesn't really get to glorify Ty Lue for as good of a coach as he is, because he doesn't have his stars active and playing. And I do think there is maybe a little tiny divide there in the organization because of that. Would Ty Lue mind a Kawhi Leonard, Paul George trade? I don't think he would be completely against it. Now, I think that his preference would just be for them to play. But you think about how many years we've gone through this now. At the end of the day, I really don't think it's going to be... I really just don't see it playing out the way that a lot of people would want to see it maybe played out. I just don't see Kawhi Leonard, Paul George getting traded, and I don't think Ty Lue is going to leave the Clippers, even though there's some rumors about that currently. So going into the 2023 NBA draft, how do the Clippers look to improve this team? They have pick 30 at the end of the first round. It's the final pick of the first round, and there are some players out there that I do really like for them. Dillon Mitchell out of Texas. He's probably my preferred candidate for this spot. He measured at around 6'6.5" without shoes on. He's got a really good plus wingspan, and he's somebody who's extremely athletic, which I think the Clippers could use just a little bit more of, some more vertical bounce. And if you're someone who lives in LA and you're a fan of the Clippers, there's another player in LA that I think Dillon Mitchell is very, very similar to. And this is a really glowing comparison because I think it's a really good player. Jared Vanderbilt for the Los Angeles Lakers is Dillon Mitchell's pro comp for me. Both of them kind of come into the league a little raw. Now, Dillon Mitchell at the NBA Draft Combine actually showcased a little bit of shooting that he did not show at Texas, where he did not shoot a single three-pointer his freshman season for the Longhorns. But in the Draft Combine, he was lacing those things up and knocking them down, which was pretty impressive to me. And also, he's just extremely, extremely bouncy, and I think defensively can give you a lot of versatility, either as a weak side rim protector, just because of his athleticism. He's going to be able to rotate over and block some shots every once in a while. But he's also got the quick twitch out on the perimeter to maybe stick with guards a little bit and definitely defend wings, which becomes a valuable addition for the Clippers for sure. And I think offensively, if he can knock down some corner three-pointers, not a ton of them, but a little bit, and he can operate around the dunker spot and be like a nice little backside guy who catches some lobs, it gives the Clippers something that they don't really have a lot of right now between Zubac and Plumlee, kind of his vertical lob threats. I know Plumlee does it a little bit, Zubac does it a little bit. I think Dillon Mitchell kind of brings a different element to that offense, though. Amari Bailey out of UCLA, I'm sure Clippers fans have a pretty good awareness of him since he went to college in Los Angeles. And for Amari Bailey, he's one of the better defensive guard prospects in this draft, and I think you're going to see when we get to free agency some of the difficulties about potentially retaining Russell Westbrook. So because of that, the Clippers maybe have to prioritize a point guard at pick 30. Now, I know they have some young guys, players we haven't mentioned yet, in, say, Brandon Boston. Jason Preston's a point guard. They've got some intriguing young players for sure that they could look to implement and use. And like I said, Terrence Mann probably is the starting point guard next year, based on what my assumption is of things that could potentially happen. Amari Bailey does make a lot of sense for this team. James Nagy out of Barcelona, another big man, pretty versatile defensively. Kind of plays more into the style that I think Ty Lue really wants to play on the defensive end. I think if you draft him, he's going to be a developmental big. You can't really expect to play him 20 minutes a night year one, and that's okay. The Clippers have a pretty good track record of drafting guys and being willing to have them play for the Ontario Clippers and take their time before coming up to the actual, quote-unquote big league team for the Clippers. So I think Najee, they'd be patient with him if they decided he was the player that they wanted to target. I think for the most part, that front office, Lawrence Frank, Jerry West, they've looked at a lot of big men over the past few years, and none of them have really hit. Daniel Oturu, Fiondu Kabanyele come to mind. For me, I think James Najee may be a different story here because he's got a little bit of a different skill set. then Amani Bates out of Eastern Michigan, a player that I really like. At 6'8", tested pretty well at the combine, 6'9" wingspan, shot the actual crap out of the basketball in the best way possible because he was just knocking down pretty much every single shot, finished top 10 in nearly every single shooting drill. He's a flamethrower torch from the three-point line. And I think for the Clippers, Amani Bates is the type of player that we've seen them draft before. You know, when they took BJ Boston after a really rough freshman season at Kentucky, they drafted him in the second round, and now it feels like a pretty good grab for them because there is some potential there, and teams I think do value that a little bit. Having some guys who are waiting in the wings, maybe, especially when they have some length to them and some size to them. Amani Bates, now, yes, he doesn't have a massive plus wingspan, but 6'8" with a 6'9" wingspan, it's not like he's tiny, right? Now, he is really frail and thin. It's going to be important for him to put some weight on and get into an NBA program where they're going to focus on his weightlifting and just putting a little bit of muscle mass on his body. But I think once you do that, it could be a really interesting investment because he has the shot-making upside that would fit around stars. I think he could be a fantastic movement shooter, and I think he's somebody who really could score the basketball at the next level in bursts. Now, I don't think he's a go-to guy. I don't think he's a 20-point-per-game scorer, but off the bench, could he give you 8 to 12 points a game? Probably, and because of that, there's value there, especially since he's going to be able to space the floor and really stretch things out for stars around him. I think Amani Bates is an intriguing upside pick here for the Clippers that I actually would consider myself picking 30th overall, because look at last year. I mean, we saw Peyton Watson get drafted 30th overall, and he had one of the worst freshman seasons I could actually ever remember. So I think Amani Bates is definitely not someone who I would take off the board just because of some struggles at Memphis his freshman year. He came back with a much better sophomore season for Eastern Michigan, and I think because of that, he's somebody who does deserve quite a bit of consideration toward the back end of the first round and definitely toward the top end of the second round, which if you're picking 30th, you're basically there anyway. Then going into free agency, this team is way over the cap, which does provide some difficulties in retaining some of their players and then also adding other players. Because of that, I really don't see a lot of players out on the market that the Clippers could look to bring in during free agency this year. Because of that, their pending free agents really become their big priorities. Mason Plumlee, who they traded for at the deadline, they have his bird rights since they traded for him. Because of that, they can go over the cap and sign him. So they could sign him to any number essentially and continue to play him on their roster and not really have an issue bringing him back. I think that's something that we will for sure see. I think that they have a lot of interest in keeping Mason Plumlee for some of his playmaking, some of his screen and roll ability. I think he's just a pretty good fit into this Clippers offense, especially with the way that they want to play. He had a really nice back end of the season for them, and I really do think he's going to stick with the Clippers, and his free throw shooting improved drastically as well. So because of that, I think the Clippers are just at a spot where they want Mason Plumlee, obviously shifting to a left-handed player, which is an interesting change this far into his career. The Clippers, though, I think that they're definitely going to keep Mason Plumlee, and probably around $8 to $11 million a year. It's not too bad of a contract, and it's definitely tradable in case they wanted to pivot and trade some of these players. And then the real big question mark for me is Russell Westbrook, and they do not have bird rights on him. They don't even have early bird rights on him because they signed him after he was bought out by the Utah Jazz. Because of that, there is some significant difficulty with actually keeping him on the roster going into next season. And even at one point, I had mentioned in a video that they should sign him to a certain contract, and I just completely spaced out the fact that they didn't have bird rights on him. For me, I think that he has significant value to this team. The issue, though, is they can only offer him the taxpayer mid-level exception. Since they are over the tax, they can only at best offer him around $6.6 million a year. And my question is, does Russell Westbrook take a contract at $6.6 million a year? I know he was just playing on the minimum with the Clippers, but remember, he was getting paid by the Utah Jazz to go play for another team. Because of that, it opened up some financial flexibility for him for sure. That definitely did make some sense for him to go out and just sign a contract to get onto a team, especially a team that was going to play playoff basketball. And he definitely did help his resume with his playoff performance this postseason. And because of that, I think the Clippers are actually going to have quite a bit of difficulty keeping him on that taxpayer mid-level exception. It's kind of like a double-edged sword, because if you're the Clippers, you obviously want him to play well for you, especially in the postseason. But the moment that he does that, his value goes up, your likelihood of keeping him goes down. And on the flip end, if it didn't work out, if it didn't go well, then you look like idiots for signing him. And you don't have interest in bringing him back anyway. The Clippers kind of found themselves in a tough spot where they got pretty much the best case scenario out of Russell Westbrook and what he could bring to the team. But the issue now is other teams in the league saw that, and they definitely are going to look at Russell Westbrook as a more valuable player than they did a year ago, per se. And I think the team that specifically does the most is the Chicago Bulls, which is where I expect Russell Westbrook to be playing next season, because they can offer him the mid-level exception there. He has a history with Billy Donovan as his head coach. Remember back to Oklahoma City when Russell Westbrook was winning MVP, that was his coach, Billy Donovan, someone who had a lot of belief in him. The Bulls right now really badly need a point guard. They, of course, use Patrick Beverley to kind of patch up that position a little bit this year, but with the likelihood that Lonzo Ball does not play through the 2023-2024 season, I think Russell Westbrook becomes a clear and obvious fit for that team. They want to play a little bit faster. Nikola Vucevic is headed toward free agency. We could see a big shift in the way that they play, the type of center that they have on that roster as well, maybe more of a traditional screen and roll guy, someone who goes downhill. And I think really Russell Westbrook does fit that team a lot better than some of the other options that they have. Now, I do think Patrick Beverley would be a guy that they would look to keep as well in Chicago. But because of that, I think Russell Westbrook is likely on his way out from the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, it is possible. It's important to note that his family is in LA. He does like Los Angeles. Remember, he was a UCLA kid himself. So is it possible that he potentially takes less money or maybe a lesser opportunity to stay closer to home? I think that's a realistic possibility. But as of right now, if you had to put money down on it, my bet would be the Chicago Bulls land Russell Westbrook. So getting into an early outlook, remember, I don't think this team's going to be very aggressive out in free agency. I just don't see a pathway for them to really add other players. The trade market's a little, cloudy right now. I don't see them trading Kawhi Leonard, Paul George. I think it's just a little too early to do that, a little too crazy to do that, honestly, with all the picks that they still owe to Oklahoma City. So because of that, I think the Clippers, for the most part, run this team back. They're going to have a decent amount of players returning to the roster. And I think that they're going to be pretty good next year. And at some point, the Clippers just need things to click and stay healthy at the right time. They're not going to be healthy for the entire duration of the season. They need to stay healthy for a 28-game stretch in the playoffs. Okay, 4 series, 7 games a series. They need to stay healthy for 28 games. And if they do that, they really do have the talent, in my opinion, to win an NBA Finals. I really do believe that the Clippers have the opportunity to make some significant noise still at some point. But it's a big if, and because of that, I would never bet on it. I would never put money down on the Clippers winning the title the year ahead of time. But I do think that they just have the overall makeup, the overall team that can get it done if they're on the floor together. Think back to the last couple of years. Paul George misses the last playing game. They end up losing, miss the playoffs. Think to this past year, Paul George misses the entire postseason. Kawhi Leonard misses, 60% of their games. And because of that, the Clippers lose in the first round. This team is extremely talented. They have 2-star players that you'd want to build around, that you'd want on the court for you in the playoffs. I think Kawhi Leonard is a big-time playoff elevator. We saw how dominant he was again this postseason, even though it was in a very short stretch. The Clippers are loaded still with talent. They have a lot of depth. They have young guys. They have trade flexibility. I'm not sure exactly what they're going to go out and target. Could they go out and maybe target a Bradley Beal? I would hope not, but they have the assets to maybe line something like that up if they wanted to. And the Clippers, for me, I just think that this team is really close. I'm just not sure if they're ever going to get it done. And because of that, I can't say that I love their long-term outlook, but their short-term outlook going into next year, they're going to be pretty good again. They're going to be at least a 500 team, especially with Ty Lue coaching. Just always seems like they win over 500. Their winning percentage is over 500 every single year. This team is good. I just don't know if they're going to be great. And that's really my biggest issue with this team, is they're so close. They're so close to being great. And every move that they made, even, people are going to flame them for the Paul George trade. It's a trade they had to make. They really did. And they've lined themselves up to be successful. If the bubble doesn't happen, they're probably a team that could represent the finals, the West in the finals that year. If Kawhi Leonard doesn't tear his ACL against the Jazz, they probably represent the West again in the finals that year as well. The Clippers are loaded. Okay, I feel really bad for them. I feel bad for Lawrence Frank. I feel bad for Steve Ballmer. I feel bad for Jerry West, because they made a lot of good decisions and it just hasn't panned out to the fullest extent yet. but you never say never. So I'm not ruling out the Clippers as a potential champion at some point, but it's getting harder and harder to see that the further we get and the more injuries that these two-star players rack up. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. Remember, Discord is in the description. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content like you saw in this video, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.